I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Good evening, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my fantabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together Rebecca and I are going to create an hour of wonderful radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the birds and the bees and the little critters that are running around in the bushes and the bushes themselves and everybody and everything, because like it or not, we're all wrapped together on this wonderful little planet called Earth.
Except they're not doing much running around right now in this part of the world. They're just kind of hunkering down and trying not to freeze to death, like the rest of us.
I don't know. I see, like mice and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Rustling about in the brush.
Yeah.
So, doing their, mice thing, looking for seeds and so forth. So anyway, we got a great show lined up for you today. As I've said, we're going to chat for another 10 minutes or so here. And then we have an interview with a fella named Jay Warmke, who has a company called solarpvtraining.com, and he's in the business of training people to install solar and has some insights on this situation in terms of employment in Ohio in the solar industry. And so we're going to talk to him. Then we will hear from our wonderful, wonderful patrons and sponsors. And then it will be Rebecca's turn to take the mic. Rebecca, what are you talking to us about today?
I am going to talk about do a segment I call, and the Oscar for Best Lake in a Supporting Role goes to Lake St. Clair.
Lake St. Clair.
Yeah.
Okay, looking forward to that. And, of course, at some point, we're hoping to hear from you at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. And, the reason we do this show as a live call-in radio program is so that we can hear from you. And I'm getting, more and more pressure to, switch over to a podcast instead of a radio thing. But there's a couple of reasons I prefer radio. One is that you can call in like this. We have it all set up. The line is ready. One,
We want to talk to you, people.
yeah, we want to talk to you. And two, the cool thing about radio is it kind of goes out and gets broadcast randomly. So it's like anybody who happens to tune in today, and welcome to somebody who's never tuned into the show before, just happened to hit this station. You could, you can be part of the whole experience, and you can get into our For a Green Future community.
We need you to help us resist Shabazz and his common sense.
Whereas if this were a podcast, it's very difficult to get outside of the algorithmic bubbles that people are in. Like just today yesterday on Facebook, I got a dozen notifications that, hey, it's Dick Van Dyke's birthday, right? Because I'm like an old 63-year-old guy, and so it's like, obviously I'm interested in Dick Van Dyke, but I didn't get a single, hey, it's Taylor Swift's birthday, which it also was.
Oh,
so because I'm in, my algorithms have said he's this age, he's this gender, he's, he likes this kind of movie. He's going to care about Dick Van Dyke. He's not going to care about Taylor Swift, which is like,
I love confusing the algorithm. I love it.
Right,
I
me too.
I
So-
do my best. It's kind of fun.
So obviously what I had to do was post a big happy birthday Taylor Swift on my
totally,
Facebook page
yeah.
And like tag her in the comments so that now the algorithm's totally confused. So I do love doing that. All right, so our little introduction here. There were two things that I wanted to talk about. Oh, and I forgot to also mention, you can text at any time at 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841. And we've been getting some nice texts, and I have to get in the habit of actually responding to them during the show. So don't be afraid to text, 419-973-5841. Okay, I thought I would use today's introduction to update people on two of the stories that we've been following fairly closely. One was a couple weeks ago we had Kathy Cohen-Becker on because she was talking about the fact that American Electric Power, AEP, wants to get rid of net metering. And they, just before Thanksgiving, they slipped this comment in, literally 4:30 in the afternoon, the day before Thanksgiving. They slipped in this comment into these rule reviews that would get rid of net metering, and it was a terrible thing. And Kathy was trying to get a big response to it, and in fact, they did manage to get over 100 people to respond in time before the end of the deadline for comments. But what happened this past Friday was the deadline to comment on the comments.
Oh,
It's called a reply comment. And so they managed to get 500 responses to that. In other words, commenting on the nasty, sneaky comment that AEP snuck in there, including me. I managed to get a comment in there because the arguments they were making to get rid of the net metering, which is, in other words, allowing companies to see how much power you put back on the grid and forcing AEP and the other utilities to pay you money for the electricity you give them. They based it on this like total misinterpretation of these regulations. It was just so sloppy and such bad reasoning. I was like, it's so arrogant. I'm like, in more sane times, this literally would have been laughed off.
You just exist as cows for us to milk. That's all you are.
That was the
why are you
attitude.
thinking you have rights?
Right, that was the attitude. That was like, why should
your
we have
interests
to
matter
pay
at all? Yeah.
for the power that we get from people, and then we sell at a profit to other customers. 'Cause
Yeah.
every kilowatt hour that a solar PV person puts on, the utilities pay them below market rates, so it literally lowers the cost of electricity. But then they take that cheap power that they haven't paid very much for, and they sell it at full retail to other people. So it's like they're arguing before the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio that we should be allowed to take the electricity for free and then sell it for full retail. And they use this idea that they're saying the solar people are not paying their fair share of maintaining wires and poles. Well, two big problems with that. One, it doesn't cost the utilities anything more to provide this power. So there literally is no added expense. There's no additional transformers, no additional wires. They
already got that stuff set up.
Right. They have the same expense whether people are using it for solar or not. And two, the only reason that utilities get to have a monopoly on providing electricity is because that's literally their job, is to provide the infrastructure, to provide the wires and poles that everybody uses to get their electricity and to put their generation on there. So they're trying to duck the only responsibility they have that allows them to make all these tons, billions of dollars in profits every year, because they get a monopoly, and the only reason they have a monopoly is they're supposed to provide that sort of infrastructure, and they're trying to get out of it. So anyway, it's looking pretty good in terms of lots of good responses and trying to beat it back. And of course, they waited again till the last minute on Friday to put their comments on the other people's comments. And their comment, again, it was totally arrogant. All they said was, well, we disagree with that. So, it must be false. They didn't even bother to come up with any justifications or arguments to support their positions. So hopefully the Public Utility Commission will just, knock them back. The other situation I wanted to update you folks on, we've been following what's been going on in British Columbia, where there are a whole bunch of dramatic protests against cutting down the last of their old-growth forests down there in the Walbrand Valley. And it's a very dynamic situation, and what's happening is there's ongoing arrests. So far, there's been 26 people arrested, and what's happening is the police have set up an illegal exclusion zone because a judge granted them the authority to arrest people that were blocking the logging, but because of what happened 5 years ago with the Fairy Creek blockade, when the police used absolutely brutal tactics and Canadians were horrified as a nation, the judge said you can't set up an exclusion zone. You have to allow people to watch you do the arrests so that so that you can't get away with breaking heads of peaceful protesters.
Right.
But that didn't. So the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are now violating the very order that they're using to arrest people because they created a 6-mile exclusion zone. But what's happening is that the forest defenders are like working around it. They're like going through the wilderness and coming back in on the other side. And so now there's protesters who are up in these trees, and they're in tripods, and they're on these cantilevered things that are very difficult to remove and take time. But the loggers have managed to get and start cutting down some of the biggest trees. So it's like a huge dynamic battle that's happening right now out there in British
Dudley
Columbia.
Do-Right would be shocked and horrified. He would.
He would. Dudley Do-Right he'd probably just chain himself to a tree, I think.
He would.
He was a good guy.
Yeah, he was.
But the current crop of RCMP people are not that good. Okay, well, so that brings us back to Ohio. And, there's been a lot of developments in Ohio in terms of legislators trying to block solar development. But what we have here is an interview with Jay Warmke, and there is also a lot of cause for optimism and a lot of bright spots. So let's go to that interview now. Hello, and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your organization?
Yeah, my name is Jay Warmke, and I am the owner and CEO of solarpvtraining.com. Also serve on the board of directors of the Electronic Technicians Association, dealing with their sustainability program and their certification program.
Okay. And you actually have a weekly training program, correct, that people can sign up for?
Yeah, we do a lot of online training, hybrid version trainings, and in-person trainings, primarily in the world of installing and designing residential solar systems and commercial solar systems. So we sell textbooks to community colleges, trade schools around the North America, and we also do these online trainings. But I think what you're referring to specifically is we do an open forum every week called Solar Noon Tuesdays, where people join in via Zoom. There's no cost to that or anything, and they actually come from all over the world. And we just geek out about solar stuff and try and keep everybody up to date about what's new in technology, what's new in regulations. So it's just a way to talk about solar for about an hour every week.
Right. And your event last week, or this past week, Tuesday, sort of caught my attention because you mentioned that you had some figures on employment in Ohio in the solar industry. Um, could you?
Yeah, Ohio is really a growth area of solar. And I think what a lot of people are doing, many of your listeners probably are thinking, well, the Trump administration has been pretty anti-solar, so the whole solar industry must be falling apart. Not really the case. The employment numbers that have just come out are showing there's pretty much a break even as far as employment within the solar industry from 2023 to 2024. And granted, that doesn't reflect a lot of the activities of the Trump administration that have taken place here in 2025, but it's kind of hard to get that data. But in the world of employment within solar, we saw California being the real leader in that. And for many, many years, it sort of represented half of all of the solar development nationwide. So it did kind of skew things. But what's happened recently is California's done some shenanigans where their Public Utilities Commission has essentially tried to destroy the industry a little bit, and it's succeeding to a fair amount. But then the rest of the country is going great guns. So we're seeing California pull back, and we're seeing it more representative. Texas is really where the growth is happening, which you wouldn't think, considering red state, blue state kind of narrative that you hear. But Texas is really investing heavily in solar. But a lot of the other states where it's really growing dramatically are states you would not have thought of, like Ohio or Indiana or Illinois. In fact, I just saw the fastest growing for employment is Oklahoma, again, followed soon by Texas. But then you get into states like Kentucky, Louisiana. So, it's kind of part of the evolution of solar where early adopters, California, Colorado, even New York to a lesser extent, they led the charge, but now all of the rest of us are catching up. So where it hasn't been developed in the past, it's now being developed quite a lot. And Ohio is uniquely situated because if you look at the national grid, it's broken into bits. Don't want to get too deep into that, but we're part of a regulatory body that goes all the way from New York City to Chicago. So if you locate a solar array, a utility scale solar array in Western Ohio, you can send that power to New York and Chicago. And the cost of land here in Ohio is a lot cheaper. The infrastructure, for a lot of different reasons, is more accessible. So we've seen a huge boom in utility scale solar here in the state of Ohio, which has seen employment within the industry just go through the roof.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's encouraging. I think part of what is prompting the Texas, at least, was that snowstorm they had, that terrible winter storm they had that cut off power for so many people, for millions of people for so long. And it kind of triggered that self-reliance gene that I think a lot of the states that you mentioned that are having the fastest growth are some of the more conservative states. And I think that idea of, being able to supply your self-reliance in terms of energy or in terms of things, that might be part of what's psychologically driving this now.
Yeah, if you look at, and again, we're sort of in the world of utility scale. I think most people think of solar like I'm going to put a few panels on my roof and that's going to help me out. But really, most of the industry is still at the utility scale level where you see these acres and acres of solar panels. And Texas is a bit unique. They've decided they want to be all by themselves. So they are not really connected to the rest of the country as far as their grid is concerned. There are a few little interconnections. So that may be good for them. They don't have to worry about federal regulations to a lesser extent, but they can't go to their neighbors for help. So if you've got power needs like the snowstorm, you're kind of on your own. And so they are building out their infrastructure, but they're also seeing a huge boom in artificial intelligence data centers going in there. So as a nation, we're kind of faced with this moment where we've seen 25 years of basically flat demand for electricity. in this country. We've seen a little bit of growth of activity, but also a lot of efficiencies going from incandescent lights all the way to LED and better appliances and more reliance on electronics. So we basically lived 25 years, or essentially an entire generation, with no load demand increases. And then suddenly in the next 3 years, we're faced with like a hockey stick curve where AI is projected to add about 12% more load demand. Transition to electric vehicles is going to add 8 or 10%. We're moving towards electrification of heating systems because the price of natural gas is skyrocketing. So when you add all of these things, global warming, AI, EV, the industrialization or the electrification of industry, my studies show that we're going really probably going to see at the low end a 20% increase in demand, and at the high end as much as a 40% increase in just the next 3 or 4 years. And just to put that in context, when we had the energy crisis of the early 1970s, that happened because there was a 7% disconnect between supply and demand. When the Arab oil embargo came on board, we had 7% more demand than supply, and we saw the price of oil quadruple during that period of time, and it caused a 10-year recession. Well, we're seeing at minimum a 20% disconnect between electricity demand and supply. So, I would not be surprised to see electricity prices quadruple. I would not. Well, the Department of Energy recently put out a statement in July of this year. They're anticipating a 100-fold increase in power outages across the United States over the next 3 years. So 100-fold basically means on average 2.5 hours per day of power outages for the typical consumer. So imagine a situation where you're 2.5 hours a day without power. Obviously, it's not going to be uniformly spread, and the price of your electricity quadrupled. So solar and wind, to a different extent, are the cheapest forms of electricity that are out there. That's why Texas is investing in solar. These other states are investing in solar. Natural gas costs about twice as much as solar, and nuclear, forget about it. That's just silly. But it's 5, 6, 7 times as much as wind or solar. So if you're a utility and you need more power, where are you going to go? You pick the cheapest option. So that's going to be primarily wind if you have wind available, or solar. And solar is available pretty much everywhere. So that's why we're seeing this boom in solar. But unfortunately, the Trump administration has decided, at this moment when we're desperate for new generation, let's try and curtail renewable energy because it's too woke or whatever they've decided. And it's really the only option, because if you want to try and install a natural gas turbine, if you're a utility, currently, because of supply chain disruption, there's a 5 to 7 year wait. If I placed an order for a turbine today, I've got to wait 5 or 6 or 7 years. But the problem is over the next 3 years. So the only option is wind and solar. I mean, I would say it's the best option, but it is the only option.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've had Mark Jacobson. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Dr. Mark Jacobson at Stanford on, and he has said that at the moment, at least in California, which has the third most data centers, the increases in wind and solar are keeping pace with the increased demand, that there is increased demand in terms of, as you say, electric cars, heat pumps, and data centers. California has the third most data centers, but California's demand still actually dropped 2% in the last year because of efficiencies and because of behind the meter solar, because of the rooftop solar for both both for homeowners and for businesses. So maybe we can keep up if we.
Well, I wouldn't use California as an example because they've been ahead of the curve on their build out. So they're keeping up. But most of the data center activity that is forecast is coming within the PJM territory, which is where we are in Ohio. Virginia, Texas, these are the areas where there's a lot of focus, but Ohio and Pennsylvania, Indiana Illinois.
Hmm.
So we're seeing this potential demand. Now, who knows? It's easy to announce you're going to build a data center the size of Manhattan, but you got to see if they actually build it and if there's actually demand for it. But the PJM territory is going to be hard hit. The Texas territory is going to be hard hit. And these are places that have not seen a large amount of rooftop solar installed. Now we're beginning to see that. I see that that's going to be forecast into the future. When I've attended some of these energy conferences, when you talk to the large data center developers, one of their issues is if they need to get load demand, if they've decided I've got this huge load demand and I want to build my own system and I want to connect it to the grid, first off, our regulations treat those as two separate events. Your load demand is one event that has to be evaluated, and your supply is a separate event that needs to be evaluated. They don't put those things together, which is kind of silly. So they're going to evaluate it, but there's a 5-year wait to get that application looked at here in the PJM territory. So if I'm going to connect to the grid, I've got 5 years of bureaucracy. So what their response is we'll just go behind the meter. We'll just build our own system. If we have to, we'll stay off grid. So I think what we're going to see in response to this load demand issue is those who can afford it are going to install their own system. And this goes all the way from data centers like Google, all the way down to your Aunt Eugene, who wants to put solar on her own home, and she doesn't like the fact that once a week or so her power is going out because the grid is getting increasingly unreliable.
Am I correct? Also, you have a project called the Blue Rock Station.
Oh, yeah. Blue Rock Station is actually, that's been our 25-year project. It's the first Earthship. I don't know if you're familiar with Earthship concept, but it's the first Earthship that was built east of the Mississippi. So we started this back in the 1990s, where it's a house. It's a completely passive, self-contained home that is made primarily out of recycled materials, primarily tires, cans, bottles, mud. So the idea is most homes are like a person hooked up to life support. If you lose that life support, like access to the grid or access to your sewer system, it's dead. You cannot live in it. So if you're going to live a self-sustained life, how do you do that? And why not build it out of things people are throwing away? So we built this home with no more concept than we were going to build it for ourselves, but people started showing up. And over the years, we've had probably 50,000 visitors go through Blue Rock Station, and we built straw bale structures and passive greenhouses, and it really became a sustainability center. And then this year, my wife and I have decided we're transferring that over to the Farmers Land Trust, and it's being created as a nonprofit, and then it will live on as a farm, as a sustainability center or whatever, but we're getting too old and feeble to be out there milking dairy goats every day. Plus I'm totally interested in solar, and so that's kind of where my interest has gone. But Blue Rock Station has been an amazing situation. We've had more than 100 interns, many of whom have gone on to change the world. So let's keep encouraging that. But that's just one facet of what we've been up to.
So you'd say that was a successful experiment then that you started back.
Yeah. A lot of people would come and they go, living this way where you're living basically rainwater harvesting and you're generating your own power and you're using composting toilets and all of this, living in a house, and they say this is hard, I don't think I could do this. Well, as far as the lifestyle, it's not hard, but my response would be, have you ever met anyone who's had an easy life? Living is hard, and the nice thing is living that way, you're connected to the world in a way that a lot of people are not, because if it's going to be cold, you better make sure you have firewood. If you've got a plumbing issue, you've got to fix it, so you just are much more in tune with what's happening around you. And I just think that's a more natural way to live. Now we've moved into the city, it's Marietta, Ohio, which is more of a village, but And now we're slowly joining the rest of the world by being disconnected from reality, which in today's world, that's not necessarily a bad thing to be disconnected from reality.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Other than to just say that solar is going to be fine. You know, if you're worried about this as an industry, as I said, economics are on solar's side. It is the least expensive form of energy, and government policies can help it a little bit. They can retard it a little bit, but you know, it's sort of like you can't fight biology and you can't fight gravity. You know, you can't fight the economics of this, where currently solar represents about 95% of all new generation installed each year, and that's going to keep happening, whether there are incentives at the federal level or not. Your whole program is about this. We will be green. We will be green because it's in our economic self-interest to be green. You don't have to do the right thing. You just have to do the selfish thing, and you will be saving the planet.
All right. Well, and, you know, we're all about saving the planet. So if you, like we do say, one of our main points on For a Green Future is that the green future is going to actually be better in every way. You'll cheaper, cleaner, healthier. You'll be happier. You know, it's what, as Jay Warmke says, it's what's going to happen is what has to happen, but it needs to happen sooner rather than later. So, all right, now it's time to hear from our patrons and sponsors. For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District.
Imagine a place where nature meets adventure, where you can climb, paddle, fish, and explore. That place, it's right here in Wood County. The Wood County Park District is here to protect, preserve, and inspire. We conserve natural and cultural treasures so you can enjoy the outdoors like never before by maintaining green spaces, providing fun programs, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. The Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future.
Want to connect with nature? Try your hand at archery, bouldering, geocaching, paddling, rappelling, and more. Whether you're seeking experience or a peaceful retreat, our parks are open every day from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset all year round. Come explore, get outside, experience nature, your parks, your adventures waiting for you. Find us online at wcparks.org or follow on Instagram, Facebook, or X, or call 419-353-1897. The Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future. And For a Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people for whom we are more grateful every day. They've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon, and there they searched for a Green Future. Up popped our wonderful Patreon page, and they searched through our different levels of membership, picked one that matched their budget, or they created one. You can create your own if you don't like the numbers we are suggesting. And so every month a little comes out of their accounts, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to bring this wonderful show to you each week. And speaking of this wonderful show, from me and the entire FAGF team, the future isn't imagined, it's built. We are renovating For a Green Future to fit the needs of every generation, new leadership, a refreshed mission, and a digital backbone powered by AI to deliver timely climate action right to you. We hired Shabazz Khan. Sorry, Shabazz.
Don't hire Sheldon.
No, as our media and communications specialist. Our media and communications will be connecting people with science, solutions, and stories that matter, faster, clearer, and more accessible than ever. The torch is steady, the flame is bright, and the message is simple. Care for the climate, care for each other, and act with knowledge, because the future belongs to those who prepare today. Visit Joe DeMare foragreedfuture.org to join, learn, and act.
I'm going to call him Shabazz Sheldon Khan from now on.
All right. Okay, Rebecca. You can say whatever you don't want, within the FCC guidelines, because you have the mic now.
I do. Hot diggity. All right. So, I want to talk a little bit about Lake St. Clair, because I had an ironic Saturday night.
Okay.
It brought up a lot of like larger Midwestern themes because I went up to Detroit to see we did a tour of the Edsel and Eleanor Ford mansion, which is just enormous and gorgeous and baronial, and apparently where Edsel Ford drank himself to death. And yeah, it's on Lake St. Clair, and it has a gorgeous view, it has a beautiful grounds, and at the same time, his dad's factories were just belching filth into it, which is still there in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah, well, probably not directly because the plant was downstream from Edsel and Eleanor's place. So yeah, and then we went to see White Christmas in Redford, and it was a beautiful 100-year-old theater. But like, it's this whole movie about this guy whose life is tanking because it's too warm, and there's not climate change, and like, it's this wonderful, masterpiece of 1950s unreasoning positivity, which sort of got us where we are, but at the same time, it has those great themes of community and people coming together to solve a problem, and it's kind of everything that's good and bad about America. Like, yeah, that kind of thing has got us in trouble, but sometimes it gets us out of trouble, so that's good. Yeah, so I want to talk about Lake St. Clair a little bit. Lake St. Clair is not a Great Lake, but it's part of the Great Lakes system. Mm-hmm. It's pretty. It plays a very important role in connecting all of the Great Lakes and all the way out to the Atlantic, and obviously, like many things in the Detroit area, many bodies of water, it separates Michigan from Ontario. And it also connects the St. Clair and Detroit rivers. So, yeah, if you are a little adorable baby sturgeon with eyelashes and a little bow, in your hair, we're going to picture our little cartoon sturgeon that way. So you're in Lake Huron, and then I believe how this goes. I'm trying to get it. We're calling this episode "Becca Learns Geography" because you're in Lake Huron. You swim down to the St. Clair River to Lake St. Clair, and then you go into Detroit River and take that all the way down to Erie. Okay. So, yeah, I'm trying to get these things straight in my mind, which nothing is really straight in my mind. It's all jumbled, basically.
No, but keep trying.
But there's stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff. It's just not very organized. Yeah. So, Lake St. Clair is known for its shallow, productive waters. It has an average depth of 10 to 11 feet and maximum depth of 21 to 27 feet.
Wow, that is shallow.
Yeah, it's pretty shallow, yep. So, yeah, it's used for sport, fishing, boating, recreation, drinking water for millions of people. And it was named in 1679 when some Europeans stumbled across it for St. Clair of Assisi, who I think was Francis of Assisi's disciple or something. So, yeah, the importance ecologically of Lake St. Clair is that it is a great habitat for fish, including muskie and bass and sturgeon, and also migratory birds, notably canvasbacks, ducks, and black terns. And there's this place called the Delta, basically where the river, St. Clair River, hits Lake St. Clair. It's called the St. Clair Flats. It's this big marshy area. There's a state park there, and it's a great breeding place for breeding, migrating, and overwintering birds. So we really need that because it's going to affect really everything in this whole hemisphere. Kind of is passing through there. A lot of stuff, a lot of birds. Some of these would include rare terns and bitterns. And now I want to know if terns and bitterns are in any way related, because they sound the same. But that's for another episode.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Plus, it's the aforementioned sturgeon, and it's a great wildlife migration corridor for all kinds of critters, including even reptiles and amphibians go through there. So yeah, some challenges which it's facing would include nasty, nasty algal blooms, sewage, farm runoff, and warming waters, which allow a lot of invasive species to thrive, including and also industrial pollution or legacy pollution, as we like to call it. So, yeah, including phosphorus, runoff, which I think comes from runoff from the Oakland County both agricultural and failing septic systems. And so they have problems like water hyacinth, which is just growing up and choking everything now. So you can't even hardly run your boat in some places. Invasive zebra mussels, it suffered also from the urbanization of the shoreline and shoreline development and degraded tributaries. So you can't have a healthy lake if everything running into it is dirty too, basically.
Right.
So, yeah, good luck, Little St. Clair. We appreciate you. You do a big job for a little lake.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And, it sounds like it's a little lake that are facing all the same problems as the big lakes.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, on to ecological news. And our first story, it's kind of a mixed story. Florida has restarted their bear hunting. They had famously a terrible, disastrous bear hunt in 2015. They tried to restart bear hunting. And in that hunt, they put out 3,700 bear permits for about, for a few thousand bears. And 304 of them were killed in 2 days, which, if they allowed that whole season to go, literally every bear in Florida would have been hunted out.
Wow.
So they shut the thing down after 2 days, and then they waited 10 years, and the population has rebounded to a degree. Black bears in Florida, despite all the swamp and all the wilderness, because of hunting, they were down to a few hundred in the 70s. They estimate the population right now at 4,000, which is good. It's a healthy population. So what they did this time was they only offered 172 permits to hunt. So 172 bears out of 4,000. They received 160,000 applications, and each of these applicants had to pay $100 to get into this lottery, and they had to, or if they were a resident of Florida, or they had to pay $300 if they were a non-resident. So this generated between $15 to $50 million in revenue. And the one interesting thing is that a lot of conservation groups actually bought up a lot of these tickets, and 43 of them were awarded. So that 172, you got to subtract 43, because 43 of the people who bought them for the purpose of not using them. But so the season goes from 12/6 to 12/28, and what happens? I say this is a mixed one, because it is great that they're back up to 4,000. That's still much less than Florida can support. Florida can support tens of thousands of bears. But taking 130 roughly out of 4,000, that shouldn't affect things like genetic diversity and so forth. We can harvest, if we are careful and we husband the resource and we get populations back up to healthy levels, we could take some harvest, but we just have to limit it. So it's looking like Florida may be doing it right this time. A lot of environmental organizations still oppose it because they say it is unnecessary, and I would agree with that. We're far from carrying capacity, but it's just worth noting.
I was not even aware that there were or had ever been bears in Florida, but I guess it stands to reason. They just sun bears in Southeast Asia and the jungle and stuff. So.
Oh yeah, bears love those marshy habitats. Yeah. They're just filled with everything from berries to fish to
yummy food and bear snacks.
Yeah, many of the bear necessities are available. Yes. Okay, next story, and this is an interesting one. Okay. December 5th in Popular Mechanics. Title is, Oops, scientists may have miscalculated our global warming timeline. And they're talking about a study done by the University of Western Australia, and they look at the skeletons of something called sclerosponges, which are little sponges that grow extremely slowly, and as they grow, they add layers to their skeletons. And by extremely slowly, I mean they were using sclerosponges from 1700. So these are 300-year-old sponges, and they took a part of their skeleton and looked at all the layers. And by looking at the ratio of strontium to calcium, they could say, okay, this part of the skeleton formed when the temperature was X.
So it's like my kitchen sink. I keep meaning to replace that.
Yes. And so what they're saying is that we passed, the global goal is to not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius. They're saying we actually passed that in 2020 when the global temperatures increased by 1.7. And that was they're saying we passed 1.5 5 years ago by blowing by it to 1.7. And so now we're even further beyond it. This referenced one of the reasons I'm bringing this story up for two reasons. One, it might sound vaguely familiar to folks because we actually reported on this when it was first discovered in the Nature Climate Change Journal back in February of 2024. But it bears repeating because we're having a cold snap, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's 10 degrees out there. It might be 11 by now. And when it gets cold, the natural human tendency is to sort of say, oh, well, I guess global warming isn't real. Look, it's cold. But that's why it's so important to look at these long-term data sources and look at the global average instead of what's happening in one spot or another at one particular time or another. So we were first on mentioning this in terms of, we beat popular mechanics by about a year. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that keeps happening. If you're a regular listener to the show for the past 5 years, you know that we'll cover a story and then it'll make it seep into the mainstream news like months or even or years later.
Well, this is the thing in the environmental news biz. Really, our stories are so wildly ignored by the mainstream media that, all you have to do is to get a scoop is not put your hands over your ears and yell, la, 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 I can't hear you.
Right. And so I'm just saying, if you want to know what's actually happening in a timely manner, keep listening to us.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So now some good news. And Trump administration has suffered some important court losses. One is the offshore wind prohibition. And this is a story in Axios on December 8th with the title, Federal Judge Strikes Down Trump's Anti-Wind Directive. And some of you may remember that on his very first day in office, January 20th, he signed an executive order basically saying no offshore wind developments, which stopped a project right in its tracks that was halfway done. And U.S. District Court in Massachusetts, Patty Saris, said that decision was arbitrary and capricious.
You ain't kidding.
And there was no reasoned explanation.
No, there was not.
There was not, because Trump literally just said, I declare no more wind, without any support.
Reasoning process can consist of, but my ego, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
That's everything goes through his head.
So this is good news. Construction can resume. Now, unfortunately, it's not the final decision. That, Trump is appealing it, but in the meantime, they can keep going. So get those people back to work. The other big loss, this was reported in a press release by the Center for Biological Diversity on December 11th. Massive logging project next to Yellowstone National Park blocked by U.S. court. So what it is 16,500 acres in the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, which is right next to Yellowstone. Ecologically speaking, they're connected, right? There's no difference ecologically between our national forest and our national park. They were going to cut down 16,500 acres, which was an essential habitat for grizzly bears and Canada lynx. Specifically, what this was overturned by was they're going to have to build 58 miles of roads, And in their decision to do this, they didn't consider where the roads were going to go or what the effect of building all these roads were going to have on the endangered species habitat.
That's something of an important detail.
Yeah. So the judge didn't eliminate it, didn't say you can't do it. The judge just said to the National Forest Service, you've got to go back and, use actual science and provide actual plans and not just say, oh, we're going to build a bunch of roads. So, all right. Speaking of actual science, here's a story from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, pnas.org, on December 8th. And this is about PFAS. And we've talked about PFAS a lot, polyfluoroalkyl substances, right? PFAS, right?
Right.
And part of what's been happening is they report on it, but there hasn't been a lot of direct evidence that it actually hurts humans, because you can't actually do the experiment where you have a control group that you don't feed PFAS and then feed PFAS to a bunch of other people and see what happens to them.
Unethical.
Yeah, there's something like ethics involved there.
A little problem.
But what these researchers did is they found a spot in New Hampshire where that actually happened, because there were a whole bunch of houses that used wells. There were communities that were using groundwater, and there was a factory pumping PFAS into the groundwater.
Yeah.
The groundwater all flowed in one direction. So they had an upstream and downstream, and everything else about these communities was the same. They were literally part of the same community. So, age, race, everything was the same between the two groups of people, except one got PFAS and the other didn't. And what happened is that unborn children were affected terribly. Extremely low birth weights were higher by 180%. Premature births were higher by 168%, and infant mortality was higher by 191%. So PFAS, we can say with absolute certainty now, PFAS kills unborn children and hurts the ones that it doesn't kill. So we have the direct proof. Yes, all the alarm and concern over PFAS is justified, and we got to get it out of the environment. So, and one of the points that these researchers made in the journal was that the cost of cleaning up the PFAS, filtering out the PFAS, in terms of healthcare costs, was cheaper than letting the PFAS stay in and then having to treat all these premature and underweight babies. So,
Yeah.
All right. And let's see here. Final story, I wanted to end on an upbeat note. This is from an email sent out by Earth Justice on December 7th. And they said 5 victories in 2025. And so I just wanted to race through them because they're all really good things. We're glad they happened. One is the Pacific Islands Heritage Marine National Monument. And we reported on that story because back earlier this year, the Trump administration opened up the whole area. That's 400,000 square miles that were protected, and he opened them up to commercial fishing. Just by, again, executive order, no support, just, I say we must do this. So that got overturned because, again, no justification, no reasoning again. And so it is closed. The Trump administration is appealing this because possibly because the fishing fleets made donations to his campaign or something. Who knows?
Apparently, if was this an executive order he did this with?
Yes.
Yeah, you can't just say because I said so with those.
Right. So that was good news. There's a chemical company, next Earth Justice victory, there's a chemical company in Louisiana called Denka, and they are one of the worst polluters in Cancer Alley, which is the area in the United States that has the highest cancer rates in the whole country. And Denka is closing. They're a chemical plant, and they've been losing money, and so they're finally going to stop polluting after something like 20 years of dumping stuff into the toxics into the environment. So that's good news. Another thing that the Trump administration eliminated were Department of Agriculture grants that were for sustainability. and and Earth Justice got them restored. Well, they got a preliminary injunction restoring them. Again, all these battles are continuing, but these are, victories in the battles. So those were restored, and the money can be distributed again, and the projects could start up again. Again, it was just a case where the administration just waved a pen and eliminated funding that had already been promised and was already in progress. The fourth of their 5 victories, there was a big gas plant in South Africa, and that was canceled because in their applications to build the gas plant, they neither looked at alternatives. In other words, they didn't even look at providing this electricity with wind and solar and battery storage, and they also didn't take into account the increased damages that would be caused by the global warming gases that a gas plant is going to put out. So, again, good news. And finally, in the Gulf of Mexico, and of course it is the Gulf of Mexico, as it has been for hundreds of years, 73 million acres were opened up to oil and gas leasing, and they opened it up without looking at the environmental impact of things like the communities along the shore or the endangered Rice's whale. They literally...
Rice's whale.
Rice's whale. Yeah,
I've
right.
heard of that.
That might be a one to talk about.
Okay, yeah.
But it's a very critically endangered whale species, and they didn't look at any of that when they granted the oil and gas leasing. They just said, start drilling. And so the court just said, stop drilling. So, all right.
Good for
Just
them.
wanted
They
to
did something
end
useful
up-
for a change.
Yeah, just wanted to end on some positive stuff this week. That's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare,
And Rebecca Wood.
and we'll see you next week. Signing off.
That's all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more 3-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.